The sky over Lima was deceptively bright on December 24th, 1971. For 17-year-old Julianne Kopka, the day was supposed to be a bridge between her teenage life at the German school and a festive reunion with her father in the heart of the Amazon. She boarded Lanza Flight 508 with her mother Maria, a renowned ornithologist. They were two souls bound by blood and a shared love for the wild, sitting side by side in the humming metal tube of the Lockheed L-188A Electra. As the engines roared to life, Julianne looked out the window, watching the coastal mist fade away, replaced by the vast, endless carpet of green that would soon become her purgatory. For the first 20 minutes, the flight was a celebration. Passengers shared stories of holiday plans, the smell of airplane coffee wafted through the aisles, and the sun bathed the cabin in a golden hue. But as they approached the Andes, the atmosphere shifted. The golden light was suddenly strangled by massive, towering cumulus clouds, dark, angry giants that rose miles into the atmosphere. The pilot, pressured by the holiday schedule, decided to push through the storm rather than fly around it. It was a fatal gamble. The cabin grew quiet as the first jolts of turbulence shook the aircraft, a low vibration that quickly escalated into a violent, bone-rattling dance. The turbulence hit like a physical blow. The plane, once a symbol of human engineering, was tossed around like a scrap of paper in a hurricane. Trays flew, luggage crashed against the ceiling, and the cabin lights flickered and died. Outside, the world turned into a chaotic strobe light of purple and white. Julianne gripped her mother's hand, feeling the cold sweat on their palms. She saw the terror in the eyes of the adults around her, a reflection of the raw power of nature that no machine could withstand. The screams of the passengers began to rise, a chorus of mortal fear that drowned out the roaring engines. Then came the moment that would be burned into history. A blinding flash of white lightning struck the right wing, illuminating the cabin with a ghostly, terrifying glare. In an instant, the fuel tank ignited. The world didn't just explode, it shattered. Juliana heard a sound that no human should ever hear. The screeching of metal tearing apart at 20,000 feet, the sound of a giant beast being ripped limb from limb. The cabin pressure vanished in a violent hiss, sucking the air out of her lungs and replaced by the freezing, thin atmosphere of the high altitudes. "This is the end. It's all over," Maria said. Her voice was strangely calm, a final anchor in a world falling apart. Those were the last words Juliana would ever hear. Suddenly, the floor beneath her disappeared. The screaming of 90 people was replaced by the terrifying howl of the wind. Juliana was no longer in a plane. She was strapped to a row of 3 seats, falling through the freezing void. The centrifugal force was so intense it blurred her vision, making the world a spinning vortex of gray and black. She was spinning like a maple seed, falling through the clouds, through the lightning, and down toward the dark, hungry canopy of the Amazon. The cold was biting, the air was thin, and the pressure in her ears was agonizing. Then, as she plummeted toward the green abyss, the sheer trauma forced her mind to retreat. Mercifully, the world went black. Juliana awoke the next morning to a symphony of horror. The silence of the jungle was louder than the explosion. She was lying on the damp earth, the seat she was strapped to having acted as a crude parachute, slowed by the dense, springy layers of the rainforest canopy before she hit the ground. Her first sensation was the weight of the humidity, a thick, wet blanket that smelled of rotting leaves, ancient earth, and life in its most primal form. Her body was a map of agony. Her collarbone was snapped, her right eye was swollen shut from the impact, and a deep gash on her leg was already attracting the first of many insects. She lay there for hours, drifting in and out of consciousness, unable to comprehend the scale of the tragedy. When she finally managed to focus, she called out for her mother, her voice a fragile reed against the towering mahogany trees that stretched like pillars to a hidden sky. "Mom! Mom!" Only the mocking cries of macaws and the distant, haunting howl of monkeys answered her. She was 17 years old, dressed in a simple, sleeveless dress, lost in one of the most hostile environments on the planet. She had no shoes, only one sandal remained, and no glasses to correct her nearsightedness, making the jungle a terrifying blur of shadows. But Juliana was not an ordinary teenager. She was the daughter of scientists who had raised her in the jungle research station of Panguana. As the shock began to recede, a cold, analytical voice took over her mind, the voice of her father's training. To stay here was to die. To wait for a rescue that might never see through the thick leaves was a death sentence. She remembered her father's most vital lesson. If you get lost in the jungle, find water. A small stream leads to a larger stream. A larger stream leads to a river. And where there is a river, there are people. As she stood up on trembling legs, the reality of her situation settled in. She was a ghost in a green cathedral. Behind her lay the wreckage of a flight that had vanished from the world. Before her lay hundreds of miles of untamed wilderness filled with jaguars, venomous snakes, and rivers teeming with caimans. She found a bag of sweets, the only food she would see for days, and began to move. She took her first step, her bare foot sinking into the mud and decaying vegetation. The jungle hissed at her presence. The insects began to swarm the open wound on her arm, sensing her vulnerability and the scent of blood. Juliana looked up at the sky, but there was no sky, only an interlocking ceiling of leaves that blocked out the sun, leaving her in a perpetual emerald twilight. She was alone, she was broken, and she was being hunted by the very environment her parents had spent their lives studying. But as she heard the faint, distant trickling of a tiny stream, a spark of defiance lit in her chest. She would not die in the shadows. She would walk until she found the world again, or until the jungle claimed her bones. The trek of 11 days was about to begin, and the first mile was already testing the limits of her soul.